Thank you, Joe. Good afternoon and welcome. The piece you just heard is titled Going Home, and can't think of a better way to start a memorial service for a dear lady than with a piece with that title. And Joe McKean, who played that for us, many of us who were here 2 years ago for Jerry's funeral, or Slick as he is affectionately known by his family, Joe graced us then with her talent and her gift of music. Before I have our first speaker come up, I've got to share with you the story of this magnificent quilt, which I just learned about an hour ago. Jeanette was part of a club called the Mothers Club. These women graduated from Pontiac High School in 1948. They went all through elementary school together. Jeanette joined the group when she moved from Pontiac, or to Pontiac, from Decatur, Illinois, when she was in the 4th grade. And we have like 3 or 4 of the members of that club with us today. And the keeper of the quilt, Joanne Forsyth, brought the quilt, or took it to her friend, Pat Kirshner, and Pat brought the quilt here this morning to have it hung. This quilt was created in 1952. I was born in 1951. That thing's almost as old as I am. By the Mothers Club. And what's significant about it is around the quilt are the hands of all of the members of that group. And there's still, some of the survivors are still with us today. What a tribute to friendship that is. One of the things I was also told by Joanne and Pat was they had a name for the club. It was called the Mothers Club first, but they were all apparently seamstresses. They would do stitching. And so they would call their club, they had a 2-word title for it. I can only share with you the first word, and it was called Stitchin'. There was a word that rhymed with it, and they would find their sessions together for stitching, a time also to do therapeutic ventilation. Let me just phrase it that way. And those delightful ladies, what a tribute it is for your presence here today and to bring this gift. Our first speaker this morning is Dr. Peter Cobbett from Michigan State University. Peter and Tim met in childbirth class, not their own. But they met when their first children were being born in 1981 at Sparrow Hospital in Lansing. By the way, I was born in Sparrow Hospital in Lansing, but a little before 1981. And Peter has been dear friends with Tim since. And he's going to offer some reflections to open our service today.
When Tim asked me to do this, my wife said to me, well, let's hope you don't have to follow Andy. I would have followed you, Andy, very happily. So the first thing I'd like to say is something that's not on my piece of paper, was that I was looking at the photographs on this projector here, and my first thought was, man, she was a babe. She was a babe. And young women, doesn't matter what century, young women are babes. And as they get older, some of them stay babes, and she did. But first, I'd like to really thank you for the privilege of making these comments when we're getting together to celebrate Jeanette's life and also to miss her, obviously. And as Dan said, we first met the family right about the time Sarah was born, about 12 weeks before Sarah was born. And at that time, all the members of the Hicks family simply opened their hearts and their homes to us. And you have to recognize, as you can tell from my accent, that we were newly into the country. I guess Tim must have thought, well, deer in the headlights. But anyway, our families have grown, obviously, lots of young people. But the Hicks have always stood for us, and we certainly appreciate that. I wanted to share two particular memories and then make a more of a serious thought. Most of you, or some of you, know that Tim has been organizing every year a canoe trip to the Pine River. And by the way, Tim, I think, where is he? There he is. I think in 2 or 3 years, or is it just next year, that it's the 50th? So we're going to have a big one, right? Yeah. And Mark and Matt, you have to be there. All your families have to be there. And one thing we won't have is what I'll talk about in a minute, because I don't think that we're quite at the ages for that yet. But anyway, it's a 24-hour trip, and we go to this campsite, and we do some canoeing. It's a lot of fun. I try to get out of it every year. But of the 30 years that I've been living here and able to go, as it were, I've actually made, I think, 25. So despite the fact I try to get out of it, apparently I'm not very good at it. But Del and Jeanette would always come up to the campground. Some years they would bring their RV, which was very important because that provided warmth and dry for those times when it was raining. But you know, one of the things that was really important about the canoe trip, both for some of the Hicks young men, and actually it turns out for my 2 sons, was to bring a young woman who they were thinking about getting married to. And they would bring the young woman as part of a test, perhaps, of how the young woman would do in the family. Isn't that right, Teresa? Where am I going for this? Where am I going with this? So all right. So here's the point. If the young woman could get through being tipped out of, purposely or accidentally, or falling out of a canoe, and still stay at the campsite, and if the young woman could get through some very interesting campfire tales, then she was good. Okay? Isn't that how it kind of works with some of you guys? Yeah. And certainly with my 2 sons, they come up that way. And looking back, I think this actually might have been totally engineered by Jeanette, that she somehow put it in, we should have this canoe trip just for this purpose. And she set it up that for 20 years we've been doing this without actually any young women coming, but that's all right, it'll happen one day. But it also was a way for her to inspect the young woman to see how she would fit in the family, but it was also a way to welcome the young woman. And I hope that the women who joined the family didn't mind the canoe trips too much. Some of them never came again, but that's okay. And of course, their first trip, we talk about every year and at the campfire, and we exaggerate the story. The other little story I'd like to tell was 30 years ago this year, I was in the US for just a week or 2, and I was doing some job interviews, having come over from England to do those interviews. And considering there weren't things like cell phones and email 30 years ago, I don't quite remember how this happened, Tim. But Del and Jeanette very kindly invited me to spend the weekend in Saginaw for Thanksgiving. And I thought this was going to be fantastic. I don't remember much about the weekend. Del and Jeanette got me rip-roaring drunk. No? Who said that? Anyway, so, and you know what it's like. You finish your drink, you put your glass down, and whoops, they filled it up again. And you cannot refuse your host. So, yeah, time and time and time. But the highlight of the evening was not getting drunk, because actually I got way too drunk. But enough that I really couldn't remember the rest of the evening. But the other thing was, I learned a great deal about Jeanette's humor. She told a really filthy joke. And she used props of a certain kind. And I suspect that she has actually told that joke very, very few times. And I wonder if she actually only told it when she'd had a few herself. And I don't remember the joke. And But I do remember it was extraordinarily funny, and it was obviously part of that weekend. And I think it's one of the reasons that actually we came back to Michigan, so we could visit with Del and Jeanette, and we'd be part of the Hicks family all over again. So, but you can tell a lot from a person's humor. You can tell how much they enjoy life and things like that. She was a wonderful friend to me and to my family. And today is a sad day, but it's also a happy day because we all think that she's in a better place. We'd obviously like her here, but she's in a better place. And whether she is Jeanette or Mom or Grandma or Great-Grandma, she's obviously been a huge part in all of your lives as well. But I hope you won't think of her as being gone, okay? There's a poem that some of you may have read called Death is Nothing at All. It's by Henry Scott Holland. And the poem is written in the voice of somebody who has recently died, and it's written to a loved one of that person. And the poem reminds us that basically people who have died who we have loved are as close to us as we would like them to be. They are right with you all the time. They can watch over us, and that death doesn't really separate us, in some respects at least. And I'm only going to read the first verse. And the first verse goes, "Death is nothing at all." That's a strange first line, but death is nothing at all. "I have only slipped away to the next room." And remember, this is the person who has died writing to the loved one. "I have only slipped away to the next room. I am I, and you are you. Whatever we were to each other, that we still are." And that's how I think about all the loved ones that I have lost. They are right here. I sometimes joke that my mother sits right here on my shoulder, and she watches what I do, and she tells me what to do still. I'm 60 plus, and she's still telling me what to do. And actually, I'm really pleased, because I hope you don't mind, that Jeanette has finally met my mother, and she sits here too, and she's watching what I'm doing, and she's giving me occasional advice. And I'm nuts enough to know that sometimes I'll be walking home, getting to my bus, which I take the bus to and from work, and I actually talk to some of the people sitting on my shoulder, and the difficulty is they talk back. Okay, well, that's not difficult for me, but it may suggest that I'm a little crazier than you originally thought. So I think the poem is right on the mark. We will miss her physical presence, but her influence will be with us for as long as we live. We can think about her, and she is right there. And I think that's the most important thing. And to finish, I'd just like to think, and I'd like to thank Jeanette. I'd like to thank her for the privilege and pleasure of her friendship. And by the way, perhaps one day, in that conversation I have with her occasionally, she will actually tell me that joke again. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. I still have to remind Peter that we haven't been the colonies for over 200 years. Being from England. Our next speaker will be I believe, the oldest grandchild of Jeanette, and that's Sarah Hicks.
I also requested to go before my brother Andy because I'll be destroyed afterwards. As I've been reflecting over the last week or so, I've been thinking about things my grandma didn't teach me in my almost 36 years of having the privilege of having her as grandma. She never ever would tell me how she made the white beard frosting for the Santa Claus Christmas cookies she made every year. I never got it right. We never found the right cookie cutter for it. It just never worked. She never shared her secrets, and euchre as she devastated my father and I. When I thought I was just finally getting the hang of it, she put her poker face on, and she and Slick completely cleared the table, and I just, okay, well, I guess my family does actually hustle their own family. She did teach me a lot about making friends, and there's almost nothing that can be made a little bit better if you come with food. There's always food. At the motorhome that was mentioned earlier, there was a tostada platter that came out of the motorhome somehow. There were drinks. She'd hug you and then walk around the corner with your favorite drink. Also mentioned earlier. She also taught me a great deal about being curious and being okay with being stubborn. And you can be as stubborn as you want to be and as self-determined as you want to be, and she was right until the very last minute. And I take comfort in knowing that this was kind of her choice and her last. She told us that was what was going to happen, and so it did. And so I take comfort in knowing that I come from a woman who was stubborn, intelligent, and yet able to welcome so many people and make an impact on so many people. And the quote that I have been reading that resonates most with me this week is that grief only existed where love existed first. And so I'm trying to take comfort in the love that sponsored this grief. So thank you for coming today.
Well, we've all heard from the prior speakers. We're going to hear now from Andy, and I have to follow him. Andy's the second oldest grandchild, and he brings with him a DVD to share with us after his remarks.
Of course, what they don't tell you is the real reason no one wants to go after me is because I will slobber and snot and cry all over this thing up here. That's how they're being very kind about that. I'm surprised the folks that went didn't remember from last time my request for a tarp and a beach towel to keep me company up here. Thank you, everyone, for coming. I'll get started at the end. So everyone who is here knows it was a very peaceful ending. I told you. My dad and I were with my grandma, and like Sarah said, she was very ready to go. We weren't ready for it, but she was very ready to go. I visited my grandmother several days before she passed, and then every day up until she did. And she, in fact, told me when you visited her the morning of November 1st, I asked her how last night was, being Halloween. They had festivities. She said, looking up at Slick's picture on the wall, she was watching him play with the kids. And you know how much he loved that. She told me that day, she said, taking my last couple steps to get out of here tonight. I said, okay, Grandma. Now, like anyone who ever ate one of Grandma's 3 o'clock dinners at about 6:30 knows, tonight turned into a couple days. You know, I had a way of doing that. But she was determined, and she was very, very ready. And I take peace in that. Now, I still believe that if she were here and able to speak today, she would very much dispute any doctor who said that she was in fact dead, or that she had any health problems at all, heart, diabetes, sugar, any type of problems whatsoever. I've seen her talk to numerous medical professionals and explain away her, chest scars in a way that had nothing to do with any prior surgeries whatsoever. Grandma, passed very peacefully. The way that it seemed to work is at some point there becomes space between breaths, and the space gets a little longer and a little longer, and then it's all space. And it reminded me of years ago being on a boat in a lake in the UP, and we got our anchor stuck in seaweed because my dad took off with it still in the seaweed.
No. You weren't supposed
Yeah.
to do that stuff.
And at some point, your boat gets stuck, and if you want to move forward, you have to cut the rope and let the anchor go. And that's what it reminded me of. But to be clear about that, she's not the anchor here. She's the boat. And what's in the container there, that's the anchor. That's what she leaves behind because she didn't need it anymore. She's the one riding off. Her body reminded us of her, but it isn't any more what she was than her makeup or her sweaters or her bed or her wallpaper. And she was done with that. But this ending is just the period on the last page of a book, and I don't think that she or any of us here would want that to be the focus of her life. So I'm going to try and describe just for a second some of my memories of Grandma. And I had the thought last night as I was putting words to paper here that trying to describe my grandmother's life, trying to describe some of the good moments and some of the good things about her would have been kind of like walking outside last night in that first snow with my tongue out and trying to catch all the snowflakes. There's just no way that someone could stand here and describe her. In fact, an interesting story she liked to tell is that in some of the activities they had at the center she was living at involved memory sharing. And they would bring photo albums or other things like that and tell stories. And Grandma brought her Africa photo album, her prized possession from her time in Africa back in 1997, to show off and tell stories. And it's another true story to add here is that some of the people there didn't believe her. They accused her, this is the kind of life she lived, they accused her of buying the pictures somewhere and said, no, there was no way someone in fact could have done all of the things that she had done in her life. And that's the kind of life that she lived. Of course, it wouldn't be a complete story without mentioning Slick, who we lost 2 years ago. And, truly anyone who knows them know that Slick and Grandma were the stuff of a Disney movie. I mean, they absolutely were. Grandma was intelligent, she was beautiful, she was cheerful, she was generous, she was, when I studied religions back in college, there's this great myth that exists in all religions of the ultimate female, the ultimate mother figure, and it reminds me so much of her. The myths across religions that exist that describe the nurturing, the caring, and all of the things that she was. She spoke all 5 of the love languages frequently, and she created a new one, of course, too. And that feeling can best be described by imagining yourself completely stuffed full with food, plus 2 or 3 pieces of pie. And that feeling was that 6th love language that she perfected. My grandmother was the stuff of fall camping trips. She was the stuff of motorhomes and caramel apples. When one of the staff at the assisted living on her last day asked what she was like to my dad and I, he responded, well, Slick was more colorful, but Grandma, she was perfect. And it's so true. I like to think she was a success by any definition, but my favorite definition of success was from Emerson: to laugh often and much, to win the respect of intelligent people and the affection of children, to earn the appreciation of honest critics and endure the betrayal of false friends, to appreciate beauty, to find the best in others, to leave the world a bit better, whether by a healthy child, a garden patch, or a redeemed social condition, to know even one life has breathed easier because you have lived. This is to have succeeded. And we come here now today to say goodbye to the ashes, not to Grandma. And the temptation that I think it's so easy to struggle with is to see her as the anchor, like we're the boat cutting loose, and she's left there in the seaweed. And the challenge is to do what she did Saturday and let go of the anchor. Because she didn't need it anymore, and neither do we. And look forward to her long journey ahead, even though she doesn't look like we're used to her looking like anymore. But we have to recognize that our failure to connect those dots is a fault in us, not in her. If we can't see that, that means we have to look harder, not that she's not there. I remember the words my father said just moments after she passed. I heard him on the phone in the hallway making those first calls, and the words he said were, well, Slicky's got his love back. I'd like to talk for just a second to explain something that would make a lot of sense to Grandma and me, probably my dad, but maybe not some other people. And that is the movie Out of Africa. Grandma spent some time in Africa back in '97. She wasn't a resident there, although some of her favorite stories came from there. But her favorite movie, and my dad's favorite movie, and my favorite movie, Out of Africa, is a movie about a woman's life, a woman who has fared much worse, but who was very similar to my grandmother in terms of her strong, independent traits, her ability to love, her intelligence. And it's a film, if you've never seen it, that is really just all about the idea of impermanence and transience and trying to understand what it means to be alive, to be dead, to stay here and be gone. And in the end of that movie, when the main character, who's a real person, by the way, leaves Africa, which is symbolic in many ways of death, she says, if I know a song of Africa, of the giraffe and the African new moon lying on her back, of the plains and the fields and the sweaty faces of the coffee pickers, does Africa know a song of me? Will the air over the plain quiver with the color that I have had on? Or will the children invent a game in which my name is? Or the full moon throw a shadow over the gravel of the drive that was like me? Or will the eagles of the Ngong Hills look out for me? And the answer is yes. Grandma, the children will sing your name, and the world will know you, and the feeling of cookie dough in your fingers. In the bewilderment that I had the first time I saw a 1-pint tub of potato salad and I thought 5 gallons was the minimum batch of that. In the smell of 500 caramel squares individually unwrapped, melting on the stove. Those were so symbolic of those little memories she unwrapped with us, melted together and shared with us, making those caramel apples. The sound of children laughing in a campground to the music of sweet corn popping over a campfire. The sight of the northern lights over the sand dunes up at Ludington State Park. So I'm going to stop because I'm going to get dehydrated. And they need to probably disinfect this lectern up here for Mr. Bonner. I'd like to close putting together a video slideshow I put together over the last couple of days that have pictures, to be fair, mostly from my camera roll. They mostly include my family because those are the ones I have. But I'd like to explain 2 things about this that Grandma would know, but I want to share with you all. This slideshow is set to Grandma's favorite scene from that movie, Out of Africa. And her favorite, she talked about it so often, where the 2 main characters, also soulmates, reminding me of Slick and Grandma, take a ride and look down at the scenery. But this has another hidden meaning for me, not just that one, of a memory from probably 20 years ago now, when we went out to get a summer day. Everyone was hanging out at the pool, and Grandma sent Slick out to pick up some, I believe it was corn, and he took me with because I always wanted to go for a ride in the Blazer. So Slick and I went out to the stand where, of course, we knew everyone and got some sweet corn to bring back. And on the way back, we stopped, and there was a a small little fair taking place on the side of the road. But one of the cool things about this was that there was a helicopter there, and the guy was charging to take people for 5 or 10 minute helicopter ride over Saginaw. So of course Slick stopped, and we at the moment just decided to go for a little helicopter ride, and we did. He paid a little extra to have us swoop over the pool. And when we came back, I explained this to Grandma, who of course was doubtful that this had ever happened. So Slick took us back with Grandma back to the helicopter. He took a group of us. I can't remember who all was there, but I remember for the second time then sitting in the helicopter with Slick and Grandma and having him pay to take us for a ride over Saginaw. One of the things I remember the most about that, the cool, things that we saw, the house from overhead, the thing I remember most was their hands clutching. So, I think it would only be appropriate to end with the goodbye that Karen Blixen says to her love in the end of Out of Africa. Now, take back the soul of Jeanette Arlene Hicks, for we knew her well, and we loved her. She was not ours. She was not mine. More than 70 years ago, at a dance at the Pontiac YMCA, she became someone else's. But I think if it's all right, we'll keep her in our hearts for a while. So I'll leave it to the video.
Thank you, Andy. And now we have a special treat again from Joe McKean, who's going to play a violin piece, a favorite of Jeanette's and the family's, called Sheep May Safely Graze. Thank you, Joe. I failed to mention that Joe is a neighbor of Matt and Teresa's. And as I mentioned earlier, she was with us 2 years ago when we gathered in the same room. I wonder what it's like to have romantic candlelight dinners with your wife, Matt, when Joe is outside the window doing violin music. That must be special.
It's a little expensive.
The matriarch of a wonderful family has passed. 2 years ago, most of us gathered in the same place to celebrate and to mourn the passing of Delbert Hicks, or Jerry, as he was known to his friends, or as I mentioned earlier, Slick, as he was known to his grandchildren. As your presence here today honors Jeanette and is a gift to her family. Thank you all for coming. As I grow older and I mourn the passing of dear friends, I recall a profound remark uttered by the great New York Yankee, Yogi Berra. Yogi once mentioned that the reason he goes to all of his friends' funerals is in the hope that they will all come to his. Of course, we are here for a different reason than Yogi's. And it is good that we are here today. It's sad, but good. We are here today because we all loved this grand lady. We are here today to mourn Jeanette's passing and to offer our support to her family and to each other. For you see, grief is a two-edged sword. On one side, there is great sadness, and Sarah alluded to this in her remarks. But on the other side, there is great love. Over time, our grief will soften, But two important things will continue to burn long after today. Our love for Jeanette and the memories that she created for all of us to carry with us. So we are here today to mourn the passing of someone we loved. But we are also here to celebrate the life of Jeanette Hicks. While I was preparing these remarks, I asked Tim if he would share with me some of the history and the memories of his mother. Tim emailed me a wonderful 3 pages of memories.
You're not reading it verbatim.
When I finished reading this biography of Jeanette, what came to mind was actually the title of a movie that was in theaters and was very popular this past summer. Some of you, I'm sure, recall the title of the movie because the name of that movie was Wonder Woman. Giving and loving were a way of life for Jeanette Hicks. She lived her life in service to others. 2 years ago at Dell's service, I recall speaking about that little dash that is between the dates of birth and death on grave markers and on memorial service literature. Well, that dash for Jeanette extended from 1930 to 2017. It was 87 years long. But what was more remarkable about Jeanette's dash was it was very wide. That dash, that line, was actually made up of 6 concentric circles. And I'll explain that in a minute. The 6 concentric circles flow out from family at the core, all the way out to the world. Now, many of you might be thinking, come on, Dan, all the way out to the world? Well, just hold on, I will explain. The first and tightest circle to which Jeanette was devoted, of course, was her family. And that circle had circles within it. They included her husband of 66 years, whom we all loved, 3 children who are grown and accomplished, 8 grandchildren, 3 great-grandchildren, 3 daughters-in-law, and last but not least, Jessica, a granddaughter-in-law. Jeanette was a homemaker and a great cook. We've heard already some stories about her culinary skills. Tim wrote of the feast that his mom would prepare for him and Mark and Matt and all their friends when they'd come home from college. I remember all of the food that would come out of that monstrous motorhome during the campouts and canoe trips we had up at the Pine River. I mean, there would be, like Andy mentioned, these gallons of potato salad and corn, and my personal favorite, the chocolate chip cookies. And this family would go camping a lot, this core. And there were circles there too. They started with a tent, and then they'd work up to a motorhome, and then trailers, and then this monstrous motorhome. And as a homemaker and a wife and mother, Jeanette was also a resourceful problem solver. Now, I knew that, but then Tim provided me with another example of that one time when the family, and the boys were still young, were camping up at Sleeping Bear Dunes National Park. And Jeanette came out of the trailer with a pot of spaghetti noodles and went to drain them and missed the colander. And they ended up on the ground. And being the resourceful person that she was, she picked up the noodles, rinsed them off, and fed them to the 4 men in her life. As Tim mentioned in his thing, with a little extra fiber. Now, when I hear that story, I do recall a time when Jeanette was coming out of the other side of the motorhome and telling me she was going to bring me a plate of her famous chocolate chip cookies. And I heard her exclaim, "Oops." And I didn't get, the chocolate chip cookies weren't delivered for a couple minutes later, and they did seem to be a little grittier than the chocolate chip cookies that I'd had in the previous year. The next circle out for Jeanette was her neighbors and her friends. Friends both here and in Florida. And some of them, as we've learned from this magnificent quilt, had been friends of Jeanette. They had been together for, well, since 1938. They've been together, and they honor us with their presence today. The next circle was her church. Jeanette was an active member of the First Congregational Church in Saginaw with Dell. The fourth circle out was Jeanette's involvement with her school, particularly with the PTA, the Parent Teacher Association, and with the band parents group. In fact, Dell and Jeanette were the president and the vice president, respectively, of the band parents, which intimidated Tim, who was trying to keep out a last chair of clarinet when he played in the band. Although I was especially impressed when I saw pictures of Tim playing the grand piano in the marching band. I didn't know he had it in him, especially on soggy football fields. The fifth circle out was Jeanette's civic involvement. She was involved with the Saginaw Shields Lions, and as you recall, when we were here for Dell's celebration of life, there was a whole row of people dressed in yellow Lions vests to honor his memory. Jeanette was also on the Thomas Township Library Board. And you think I was kidding about Wonder Woman? Now we get to the sixth circle out, the world. And this circle had two dimensions. The first was travel. Jeanette and Dell traveled first to the southwest Arizona with their motorhome, and then kind of settled with a group of folks in Florida where they would meet friends every winter. But they also took trips to the Caribbean, to Mexico, to Europe, to South Africa, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, and Germany. In fact, I recall mentioning Adele's, and Tim mentioned this again, this must be a big thing for Teresa, who's from South Africa, the big five. Let me see if the elephant, the rhino, the lion, the water buffalo, and the leopard. Did I get it right? Okay. The big five, apparently this is this huge thing, and Dell and Jeanette saw all of the five of the big five on one safari trip in South Africa. The second dimension in the circle of world comprised of exchange students. Not only would Dell and Jeanette raise three boys in their home, but they would welcome the children of other parents from all over the world, from Germany, Sweden, Brazil, Japan, Colombia, South Africa, and then, of course, not last but not least, our friends from Great Britain. Wow. What a dash, right? For a Wonder Woman whose dash began in 1930 in Decatur, Illinois, to live a life like that, now that is a life worth celebrating. I want to close with what I think is a fitting tribute to this woman that is found in Proverbs, chapter 31, verse 29. And that verse from the Old Testament goes as follows. Many, many women have done excellently, but you surpass them all. Jeanette's life here has ended. As Andy mentioned, the anchor rope has been cut. Herman Melville once wrote that life is a journey that is homeward bound. And how appropriate that quote is from Melville. Life is a journey that is homeward bound, when we think that Joe McKean treated us to open this ceremony with a musical piece titled Going Home. But Jeanette is not gone. You know, as Peter Cobbett said, in a sense, she's just changed addresses. Jeanette, and I recall what Andy overheard his father saying the day she passed. Jeanette, your husband has been waiting for you for 2 years. Godspeed on your journey home, you Wonder Woman. And now you walk into the mystery of God.
Ladies and gentlemen, this does conclude our services today. On behalf of the family, I would like to thank you all for coming. The family is going to be going to Ottawa Park for a short burial, but they would like to invite everyone to go to Shepherd's Hollow Golf Club for a time of food and fellowship, and if you need directions, we have them printed outside in the hallway and at the front desk. Thank you all for coming.